Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we conclude with Part 5, the Spinal Gas, from Astrology and the Ductless Glands, by Augusta Foss Heindel. Chapter 4, the Spinal Gas. According to the Rosicrucian teachings, the blood is a gas and not a liquid as affirmed by science. When the spinal column is observed by one with the spiritual sight developed, the spinal gas appears like a thin stream of light, the color of which differs according to the temperament and morals of the man. In the sensual man, the spinal fire is a dull brick red, intermingled with a slight coloring of blue. As his aspirations rise and his love for others is awakened, his color becomes clearer, and the blue light with a slight coloring of pink is drawn upward. When one observes the spinal gas of the spiritually awakened man who has purified his mind and body by high ideals and by a life of service, especially if observed while he is in a meditation or prayer, there is seen a most wonderful sight. The spinal fire is of a most ethereal blue which is difficult to describe. The nearest color to it would be that of a blue gas flame, with the softest tint of pink and yellow playing through it. From the lower part of the sacral to the upper part of the lumbar region, the colors are still slightly clouded with red, but as the spinal gas rises upward, it becomes pure and more transparent. This spinal fire during meditation and prayer becomes more active, coursing more swiftly through the spine, and as it touches the spinal nerves, it emanates a tiny spark at the beginning of each until it reaches the medulla oblongata, which seems to act as a transformer or separating station, where the color makes a change, the darker or murkier colors again descending, while the lighter and purified gas is drawn upward. This is a sieve-like enclosure at the lower end of the fourth ventricle, which is connected with the medulla oblongata. In the latter, this gas seemingly goes through a purifying process. Thence it passes through the fourth ventricle into the third, where it passes through a golden furnace-like glow. Then it is absorbed by the pineal gland. The color of this flame, however, is different in an adult who is earthly, filled with passions and desires, whose body is fed on the flesh of slaughtered animals and which is steeped in tobacco, liquor, etc. This man's spinal gas is of a murky rose color and has a tendency to cling to the lower part of the spinal column. It is with considerable effort that such a man may draw some of this gas to the brain for use in mental work, and its color is not the clear blue of that of the man with high aspirations. The pineal gland of the sensual man who dissipates his vital fluids is very small, while in the child and the adult who lives a chastised life, this organ is large. Water, when brought to a certain heat, is turned into steam and may evaporate into the air, leaving a tiny residue of crystallized sediment in the kettle. Conversely, the blood while in the body is a gas, but when it becomes in contact with the air, it condenses and becomes a liquid. Now, how is it possible under similar circumstances for science to investigate with its material instruments and clearly understand the functions of two such vital organs as the pineal gland and the pituitary body, whose inaccessibility make it almost impossible to remove them without changing their shape? When the man with the developed faculty of spiritual sight, however, investigates their psychological functions, he does not need to remove the organs but turns his X-ray sight upon them and observes their action. Spiritual observation. The writer has been privileged while under the direction of the teacher to watch these two higher ductless glands in action. The time and opportunity were ideally prepared, and a living person was the subject. Both organs were much enlarged, which gave marvelous clearness to our observations. Let us observe this subject, a woman in spiritual meditation, one who has been living a pure and chastised life, and whose food for years has consisted of fruit, vegetables, and cereals. The pituitary body, through which these aspirations are first registered, is much enlarged. The posterior lobe is turned backwards with its funnel-shaped neck enlarged, with a mouth opening at the end. From this mouth open exudes gas. of a soft rose color, slightly intermingled with yellow and blue of the pale shades. The spinal column is filled with a pale blue ether, intermingled with soft pink and yellow. After this gas leaves the medulla oblongata and enters the pineal gland, it is a wonderful blue color such as one sees clinging to the mountains after sundown. The pineal gland is enlarged with the point of the cone leaning towards the pituitary body. The tiny appendage of skin at the end of the former, which was mentioned in a previous chapter, is elongated and emits a small flame similar to the blue flame of a gas jet. These two organs vibrate at a most rapid rate and lean towards each other over the third ventricle. This ventricle is an oblong cavity lying between the optic thalami. When the life of the aspirant has been pure, the ventricle appears to the occultist like a tiny furnace with a golden glow. From this, the vitality of the body is drawn. The pineal gland, as already stated, has the appearance of a tiny male organ, while the pituitary body with its open mouth is similar to the female organ. So we may see that science, which is trying to prove that these organs are directly connected with the functions of the brain and the generative organs, is right. They have direct influence upon man from the two ends of the spinal cord. For does not the sex pervert in time become a degenerate? Conversely, of the vital fluids and a chastised life strengthen the brain, and those two ductless glands become enlarged. But in the sensualists, they atrophy. Science is correct in its assertion that these organs are larger in children and women than in men, even men who live a pure life. Astrologically discerned, in an endeavor to further prove the above assertions astrologically, the writer has compared the horoscopes of patients who have been in touch with the healing department at headquarters. She found 10 horoscopes of young men and women who were afflicted with epilepsy. 4 of these patients were found with the moon in conjunction with Neptune in the sign of Taurus. This sign has rule over the throat and also indirectly over the generative organs. Here again we find, as Max Heindel has said, that Neptune is the higher octave of Mercury and not of Venus, as some astrologers claim. For this planet, which has rule over the pineal gland, also has rule over the brain and the spiritual faculties. 2 patients out of these 10 have Neptune square to the moon, while one has Neptune in conjunction with Mars and another Neptune in opposition to Saturn. In all of these cases, we find that they have formed the secret habit of sex abuse during childhood, which had wasted the vital fluids necessary in building the brain, and there was a mental deficiency bordering upon idiocy. If the doctors could have opened the brains of these patients to examine the glands, they would have found them diseased according to the planetary afflictions, which might have taken the form of atrophy, tumor, or in the case of the pineal gland, inflammation. Astrologers in the past have made the claim that Uranus was the higher octave of Mercury and had rule over the higher mental qualities, and that Neptune was the higher octave of Venus. At the same time, they have admitted that an afflicted Uranus in the angles caused separation and marriage, and that a square or conjunction of Uranus and Venus in a woman's horoscope would attract undue attention from the opposite sex, thereby endangering her morality. Uranus has always been associated with licentiousness and laxity in morals, and illicit love affairs, while Neptune has been connected with secret orders, deceptions, and frauds. The writer has wondered why these 2 higher spiritual planets were reversed by the astrologers when they represent opposite characteristics. Spiritual investigation shows the higher octaves to be as follows. Neptune, ruler of the pineal gland, is the higher octave of Mercury. Uranus, ruler of the pituitary body, is the higher octave of Venus. The drunkard, when under the influence of liquor, has an overstimulation of the pituitary body, which causes reeling, hilarious conditions. This gland regulates the emotional nature and the circulation of the blood, being ruled by Uranus, the higher octave of Venus, the ruler of music. The pituitary body is influenced by music and harmony, which set into vibration. The morphine or cocaine inebriate receives his stimulus through the pineal gland. Rejuvenation. We have read much in the papers about rejuvenation through the grafting of animal glands into man to restore his youth. Should this be carried to any great extent, the next generation would be liable to have many degenerate children, and the institutions would be filled with mental perverts. The animals from which these glands are taken, the goat and monkey, multiply very rapidly, and naturally there would be a degenerating effect upon the man who is foolish enough to permit this grafting to be done upon his body. Furthermore, this rejuvenation is for a short period only. If man continues to live the life of the senses, he will soon dissipate this new energy, which will have to be replenished from time to time. There is but one fountain of youth, one elixir of life, and that is our food and our thoughts. If we live a pure and simple life of unselfishness, eating lightly of vegetables and fruit, keeping close watch over our desires, then we need not sacrifice the life of an animal to replenish our wasted energy. Ponce de Leon sought the fountain of perpetual youth in far-off lands, while he had 2 tiny cups within his own brain which, if he had only paid the price of making an exchange of the worldly life of the senses for a spiritual life of purity, would have given him the elixir of life. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.